The wait. She was sitting on a concrete barrier outside a building where decisions were being made without her, and she was not thinking about the decisions. She was thinking about the wind. The valley ran northeast to southwest. She had established this the moment the vehicle stopped, before anyone opened a door, from the way the dry grass on the eastern slope leaned and recovered and leaned again at the rate of something persistent rather than something gusty. Persistent wind at ridge level meant a secondary thermal in the valley floor in the afternoon hours, the cold air from the north funneling into the warmer depression and producing a cross component that would arrive from the right at a velocity that would not match the ridge reading. This was the kind of problem that could be solved. She had been solving problems like this for 9 years. Nobody in the building behind her knew this. Nobody in the building behind her had asked. Staff Sergeant Briggs had told her to wait outside 22 minutes ago. He had said it the way a person says a thing they say often, without making eye contact, already turning back toward the room, already moving to the next item on a list that did not include her. "We'll call you when we need the language piece." He had closed the door. She had found the concrete barrier and sat down and watched the grass on the eastern slope. The village was called something she would not repeat in this account. It occupied the floor of a mountain valley in a country whose name also did not matter to what happened here. What mattered was the geometry. 2 ridgelines, 1 depression, 1 church tower at the eastern end of the main street, and 1 3-story stone building at the western end, where a man named Vasich was holding 4 people and had been holding them for 31 hours, and had demonstrated in those 31 hours a precise understanding of his own leverage and a precise willingness to use it. Major Dross was inside with 9 men and a situation board and a window of time that had been shrinking since the previous evening. Sarah had been brought for the language. Vasich spoke 3 of them, and English was not among them, and the initial negotiator had compounded a misunderstanding in the first 6 hours that had closed a channel that might otherwise have remained open. Sarah had opened it again in a 40-minute phone call at 0340 that morning, speaking in the specific dialect Vasich recognized as the one his grandmother had used, the one that carried the register of home rather than government. She had bought time. She had been told she had done well. Then she had been told to wait outside while the men with rifles decided what to do with the time she had bought. She watched the grass. She counted the lean and recover cycle. She did the arithmetic. Behind her, through the stone wall, she could hear the specific quality of sound that a room makes when the people inside it are looking at a problem they cannot solve. The first thing that told Delgado what he needed to know was the way she sat. He had come outside for air at 1340. The specific stale pressure of a room full of men who had been working the same problem for too many hours had reached the point where leaving briefly was more productive than staying. He had stepped out and found Sarah on the barrier and stood there for a moment, doing what he did in every new situation, which was to observe before he committed to any interpretation. She was sitting with her back straight and her hands loose in her lap, and her eyes moving between the eastern slope and the church tower in a pattern that was not idle and not anxious. It was the pattern of someone running calculations. He had seen this specific quality of attention in 3 categories of person in his 21 years of service: designated marksmen, forward observers, and people who had been trained to be both. She was looking at the tower and the building and the distance between them, and she was doing something with what she saw that required no movement and no tools and no paper. She was doing it in her head, the way a person does a thing they have done enough times that the tools have become internal. He sat down on the barrier 6 feet from her. He did not speak. She did not look at him. After 90 seconds, she said, without turning, "The thermal starts around 1500. Before that, the valley read is clean." He said nothing. He looked at the church tower. He ran his own distance estimate. It was not as fast as hers. After a moment he reached into his breast pocket. He did not take anything out. He put his hand back in his lap. He looked at the eastern slope and the leaning grass, and he did not say anything else, and neither did she, and when Briggs opened the door and said Delgado's name, he went back inside and did not look at her as he passed, and she did not look at him, and this was, in the language they both happened to speak, a conversation. The briefing room held the map and the problem in equal measure. The map was a 1 to 5,000 topographic overlay of the village, with the target building marked in red and the church tower marked in blue, and the 1,100-meter line drawn between them in black. The problem was that the 1,100-meter line had a 14-inch window at the far end, and a man behind it who moved unpredictably between three positions and had not held still for longer than 11 seconds in any of the observation recordings from the preceding 6 hours. Kellerman was the problem's solution. He had trained for shots like this the way musicians train for difficult passages, not by performing them, but by decomposing them into their components and practicing each component until the performance became a matter of assembling things that were already automatic. He had made a confirmed shot at 1,340 meters in a previous deployment. He had made shots in conditions that required corrections most shooters could not calculate. He was the specific answer to this specific problem, and everyone in the room knew it, and the plan was built on it. The plan required the church tower. The church tower required climbing 34 stone steps that had been built 5 centuries ago for people who were not carrying 47 pounds of equipment in darkness. This was a known variable. It had been assessed and accepted. The assessment had not been wrong. The acceptance had not been careless. At 14:23, Kellerman's right wrist found a step that was not where the darkness told him it was. He went down on the stairs with the specific controlled sound of a man who has fallen before and knows how to fall, absorbing, rolling, protecting the rifle first. He protected the rifle. His wrist received what the rifle did not. The radius fractured at the distal end, the specific injury of a hand thrown out to catch a fall, the bone doing what bones do when they are asked to receive more than they were designed to absorb. He knew what it was before he finished moving. He knew what it meant before he told anyone. He lay on the stone stairs for 4 seconds, with the rifle across his chest and his right wrist against his body, and he did the calculation that every person in his position eventually does. The distance from what I can do to what this requires, and whether that distance can be crossed. It could not. He came down the stairs one-handed and told Dross in the courtyard, and Dross's face did the thing it did when a variable had changed in a way that required the entire calculation to begin again. The next 40 minutes had the specific quality of a room looking at a problem from every angle and finding that every angle produced the same answer. Dross's secondary marksman, a staff sergeant named Pitts, had a confirmed long-range record of 940 meters in field conditions. The shot was 1,100. The window was 14 inches. The wind component Pitts had never trained for at this distance in this valley geometry. Dross asked him directly, in the specific way Dross asked things, without inflection, without pressure, because inflection and pressure produced answers shaped by the desire to please rather than the facts. Pitts looked at the distance and the window and the afternoon sky and said, "Sir, I cannot guarantee that shot." Dross nodded once. He moved on. He moved through the room the same way. Each man received the same question and the same quality of attention, and each man gave him the same form of answer. Honest assessments of the distance between what they could do and what the problem required, each distance slightly different, each distance insufficient. This was not failure. These were men who had spent careers understanding their own capabilities, precisely because precision about capability is the difference between a calculated risk and a mistake. They were telling him the truth. The truth was that Kellerman's wrist had taken the plan apart. At 15:08, the window of time Sarah had bought that morning closed. Vasik's deadline passed without contact. The phone rang 11 minutes later, not from Vasich, but from the government channel, which carried a different kind of pressure in a different kind of language, and did not ask whether the team was ready, but assumed it was. Dross stood at the window and looked at the church tower and the 1,100 meters between it and the building where 4 people were waiting for something to happen, and said nothing for 30 seconds. Then he said, to the room, "Is there anyone else?" Delgado had been standing near the door. He had been standing near the door since Kellerman came down the stairs. He had the quality of a man who is waiting for a specific moment rather than waiting for anything to happen, which is a different kind of waiting entirely. He said, "There may be." Dross looked at him. "The contractor outside," Delgado said. "I'd like you to ask her." The room produced the specific silence of people who have heard something that does not fit the category they have assigned to the situation. Briggs said, from the far wall, "She's a translator." "She may be more than that," Delgado said. He said it without argument in his voice, without the quality of a man making a case. He said it the way a man states a fact he has observed and is presenting for consideration. "I'd like you to ask her." Dross looked at the window. He looked at the church tower. He looked at Delgado for 3 seconds, with the expression of a man calculating not the probability of being right, but the cost of being wrong. Then he walked to the door. She was still on the barrier. She had not moved in the way that people who have nothing to do not move. She had not moved in the way that someone does when they are exactly where they have decided to be. Dross came out alone. He stood in front of her, and she looked up at him, and he looked at her for a moment, the same assessment, the same 3-second investment in understanding before speaking, and said, "Kellerman is down. Fractured wrist, trigger hand. The shot is 1,100 meters, 14-inch window, moving target. Valley crosswind with a thermal component I don't have a read on. I need to know if you can make it." She looked at him. She did not look at the church tower, because she had already looked at the church tower for the preceding hour and 40 minutes, and had what she needed from it. "What time is the last clean window before the thermal fully develops?" she said. Something moved through Dross's face. Not surprise exactly. The controlled acknowledgement of a man who has just received confirmation of something Delgado had told him. 15:30, he said. "We have 22 minutes. What is the wind reading at ridge level?" 14 miles per hour north-northeast. She nodded once, the nod of someone filing a number. Secondary valley component will be running at approximately 9 miles per hour from the right, arriving as a variable in the final 400 meters. She paused. "I need to see the observation recordings, the last 6 hours. You have 12 minutes to review them. I need 8. She stood up from the barrier and picked up her bag. "And I need to know what rifle." "Kellerman's," Dross said. "Accuracy International AXMC .338 Lapua. It's set for him. You'll need to adjust." "I know the platform," she said. She walked toward the door. She did not say it as a statement of qualification. She said it the way a person says a fact that happens to be relevant, the way you say the name of a road you have driven before when someone asks you how to get somewhere. She walked past him and into the building and down the corridor toward the operations room, and she did not look at Briggs as she passed him in the doorway, which required the specific discipline of someone who has decided that certain observations have no useful application to what happens next. 8 minutes was enough. She watched the recordings with the compressed attention of someone who has trained for this specific form of analysis, not the full video, but the intervals, the gaps between Vasik's positions, the specific tells of a man who had been holding the same space for 31 hours and had developed habits he was not aware of. At the 0840 recording, he touched the left side of the window frame before moving away from it. A steadying gesture, the hand of a man who was tired and using the architecture to compensate. At the 1205 recording, he did it again. At the 1318 recording, he did it a third time, and the interval between the touch and the moment of stillness before he moved was consistent across all three instances. 4 seconds. She closed the laptop. She stood up. She said to Delgado, who had been standing in the doorway watching her watch the recordings, "He touches the left frame before he settles. 4 seconds between the touch and peak stillness. I need someone on the phone with him at 1528 who can ask him something that requires him to think. Not to decide, to think. A question about his children, or his mother, or something he loves that he hasn't thought about in the middle of all this. When he thinks about it, he'll go to the window. People go to light when they think." Delgado looked at her for a moment. He said, "You'll need to tell Dross." "Tell him while I'm getting into position," she said. She picked up Kellerman's rifle case. "I know the way up." The church stairs were exactly what the darkness of the first attempt had made difficult. In daylight they were steep and worn, and covered in the specific grit of a space that had not been cleaned in years. She went up them the way she went up everything, with the weight distributed correctly, with the rifle case carried against her body rather than swung, with her breathing already in the pattern she would need at the top rather than the pattern of effort. You do not begin the breathing at the shooting position. You begin it well before, and you arrive already settled. The bell tower was 3 meters by 3 meters, open on all 4 sides, the bells removed decades ago, the wooden floor solid. She set the rifle case down and opened it, and looked at Kellerman's setup for 30 seconds without touching anything. She understood the man from his setup, the turret markings, the dope written on the stock in his hand, the specific way he had taped the bipod feet. She understood what she needed to adjust and what she needed to leave. She made 4 adjustments. 3 were for the distance and the wind component. The 4th was for the difference between her eye and his, the specific geometry of a shooter's position that belongs to them and cannot be borrowed without modification. She made the 4th adjustment from memory rather than measurement, the way a musician adjusts a borrowed instrument by feel after enough years with their own. She set the bipod, got into position, found the window in the glass. 14 inches. In the scope at this distance, it was a specific kind of challenge, not small enough to be impossible, not large enough to forgive error. It was the kind of window that the shot was either exactly right for or not right for at all, with no space between those two things. She could see the left edge of the window frame. She waited. Through the earpiece, Dross. "Delgado is on the phone with him. Question about his daughter's name. Stand by." She breathed. The thermal was building in the valley below her. She could see it in the movement of the grass, the slightly different lean from 20 minutes earlier, the secondary component arriving from the right exactly as she had calculated. She adjusted the hold 3 inches left of where the straight calculation put it. This was the part that could not be written down, the part that lived in the hands and the eye, and the accumulated record of years of standing in wind and understanding what it did, and how to speak to it in the specific language of small corrections made before the trigger broke rather than after. Through the earpiece, faintly, she could hear Delgado's voice, low and unhurried, and asking about a girl named something she couldn't fully make out, asking what she was like when she was small, asking the question in the specific way of someone who genuinely wants to know. It was the right question. She knew it was the right question because she had chosen it. People go to light when they think about something they love. She had been right about this every time she had relied on it. The left edge of the window frame moved. A hand appeared, found the stone, steadied. "He's at the window. someone said through the earpiece from the observation point, touching the frame, left side. She was already settled. She had been settled since the top of the stairs. She had been building to this specific moment since the concrete barrier and the leaning grass and the arithmetic that had been running in her head since the vehicle stopped. 4 seconds between the touch and peak stillness. She counted from the touch. 1, 2, 3. The wind held its pattern. The thermal held its component. She held her hold. 4. She squeezed. The .338 Lapua at 1,100 meters does what it was designed to do. It does it without negotiation, without the possibility of a different outcome once the round has left the barrel, with the specific finality of physics applied correctly to a problem that required physics applied correctly and nothing else. She received the recoil the way she had been taught to receive it, not resisting, not absorbing, distributing it through a frame that had been arranged to distribute it, the way water distributes through a landscape that has been shaped to receive it. She cycled the bolt. She reacquired the window. Vasic was no longer at the window. Through the earpiece, 3 seconds of silence that carried everything. Then the observation team. Target down. Confirmed. Window is clear. Then Dross, whose voice had not changed since he came outside to find her on the barrier, and whose voice did not change now. Hostages. Moving to the door. They're moving on their own. A pause. All 4. They're all 4 moving. The bell tower held the specific stillness of a space where something has just been completed. She kept her eye at the scope for another 15 seconds. The habit of someone who has learned that confirmation is a professional requirement, not a personal preference. Then she lifted her cheek from the stock. She looked at the valley below the tower, the stone street, the afternoon light doing what afternoon light does in mountain valleys, coming in low and gold and without interest in what had just happened beneath it. She disassembled the position with the same economy she had assembled it. She did not hurry. There was no longer anything that required hurrying. On her way down the stairs, she passed Kellerman coming up. Someone had told him. Someone had come to get him before she was done, and he was climbing with his left hand on the wall and his right arm against his chest, and his face had the expression of a man who needed to see the position for himself and would not be talked out of it. He stopped when he saw her. He looked at her for a moment, at her hands, at the rifle case, at her face. What was the hold? He said. 3 inches left of calculated. Thermal was early. He nodded. He looked at her for another second with the expression of someone who has heard confirmation of something they already knew. He said, "Who trained you?" She looked at him steadily. "The same program you did," she said. "Different year." He held her gaze. He nodded once, the nod of someone receiving information and placing it correctly. She went past him and continued down the stairs, and he stood on the landing and watched her go with the expression of a man who is processing the difference between the world as he understood it 90 seconds ago and the world as it currently is. The debrief was held in the same room where the problem had been worked and not solved. The light was different now, the afternoon coming through the single window at a lower angle, warmer, the gold light of a day that was moving toward its end. Dross sat at the table. The team filled the chairs. Sarah sat at the end near the door, in the position she would have chosen regardless, and waited for the questions. The questions came in the order she had expected. Who trained her? When? Under what program? The classified record that had been explained to her as protection and had functioned for the past 4 years, primarily as invisibility. She answered each question accurately and without more than was asked, the way she answered everything. She had been a MARSOC critical skills operator from age 24 to 29. She had completed Scout Sniper School in the 2nd year of that period. She had been selected for a joint intelligence program at 29 that required the operational record to be restructured, civilian contractor cover, linguistic specialty as the presented function, the other functions kept elsewhere in files that did not travel with her. She had been in this configuration for 2 years. This was the 3rd deployment under it. In 2 years, Dross said, how many times has the language piece been all they needed from you? Every time except today, she said. He looked at the table. He looked at his hands in the specific way he had not looked at his hands before. He had the expression of a man running an accounting of something, adding up the times he had made a decision on insufficient information and arriving at a number he was not finished with. He looked up. Every team you've been attached to, did they know? No. Were you ever in a position where the language piece wasn't enough? She held his gaze. Once, 18 months ago, the shooter they had was sufficient. I stayed in my lane. He absorbed that. And today? Today the shooter they had wasn't available. A pause. So I adjusted. Briggs was at the far wall. He had the expression of someone performing the controlled recalibration of a person who has held a position confidently and has arrived at the moment when the confidence requires re-examination. He did not speak. This was, for Briggs, the correct instinct. Some recalibrations are private. Delgado was near the door. He had the expression of someone who already knew all of this and was watching the room learn it, which was a different activity with a different quality of attention. He did not speak either. He did not need to. Your file, Dross said. The one I have access to. It says linguistic analyst, contract grade, 2 deployments. Yes, sir. The other file. Requires a clearance level above this room, she said, which is why it isn't here. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, what I am going to do is write a contact report that accurately describes what happened in this valley today. Who made the shot? Under what conditions? At what distance? With what result? He looked at her steadily. That report will go to people who have the clearance to read the other file. What happens after that is not my decision. She nodded once. That's all I'd ask, sir. He looked at her for a long moment. Outside the window, the valley was doing what mountain valleys do at the end of the afternoon. The light leaving the lower slopes first and holding longest on the upper ridgelines, the grass going gold, the shadows assembling themselves in the places where shadows always go. He looked at her with the specific expression of a man who has spent 16 years in a profession that requires correct assessments of people under time pressure and has just identified a failure mode in his own assessment process. Why linguistics? He said. It was not a tactical question. It had the quality of a man asking something because he genuinely wanted to understand. She looked at the window. My father spoke 4 languages, she said. He was a border patrol agent in the Del Rio sector for 22 years. He used to say that language was the only tool that worked on both sides of every border. She paused. He also taught me to shoot. He said the 2 things were related, that both of them required you to understand distance, what was between you and the thing you were trying to reach, and how to account for it. The room was quiet. He was right, she said. She looked back at Dross. About both. Mid-script CTA. If you want to see more stories about the people who were never in the official report, subscribe to SEAL Legends and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Every person on this channel was told to wait outside at some point. Not one of them stayed there. 3 weeks after the village, a package arrived at Sarah's forwarding address in a city she rotated through every few months. It was from Kellerman. Inside was a folded piece of paper with a distance written on it in his hand, 1,103 meters, the confirmed distance from a post-operation survey, and below it, in the same hand, 3 inches left. I would have gone 2.5. The thermal was running hotter than I read it from the ground. You read it from the tower. That's the difference. Below that, one more line. Same program. Different year. I checked. She folded the paper and put it in her jacket pocket and did not respond. The correct response to a thing like that was to let it exist without diminishing it. 6 months after the village, the contact report Dross had written made its way through the channels that received such things and landed with a flag attached to it at a desk occupied by a woman named Colonel Hargrove, who had spent 11 years building a program that needed the specific thing Sarah was and had been looking for 3 years for a way to formalize it. The flag on the report said, in Dross's careful hand, "Recommend evaluation for assignment. Full background attached under separate cover. This person should not be kept outside." The program was called something that would not appear in this account. It convened in a building that would not appear in this account. It was staffed by 12 people who shared one characteristic. They each appeared, in the files that traveled with them, to be one thing, and were in practice something considerably more. Sarah arrived on a Monday in March. She was given a badge and a room assignment and a briefing folder. She read the folder in full, mapped the facility layout, and set her bag down beside the desk with the economy of someone for whom this sequence of actions had been performed enough times that each element was automatic. She was the last to arrive. The other 11 were already in the conference room when she walked in. She recognized the quality of attention in the room, the specific alertness of people who had learned not to reveal everything they were before they understood what a room required. She recognized it because it was the same quality she carried and had been carrying for 4 years in rooms that did not deserve it. She sat down. Nobody said anything. Then, the man at the head of the table, early 50s, the weathered, unhurried quality of someone who had been doing this long enough to have no interest in performing any version of it, said, "You're all here because someone watched what you did when you were told to wait outside." He looked around the room. "This program is what happens when we stop telling you to wait outside." The room absorbed that in the specific way of people who have been waiting a long time for the exact words that were just said. Outside, the March sky was doing what March skies do in that latitude, holding the cold a little longer than the calendar said it should, the light clean and honest and without softness. Sarah looked at the window for a moment. She thought about her father and the 4 languages, and the 2 things he said were related. She thought about the concrete barrier and the leaning grass and the arithmetic she had been running since the vehicle stopped, and the specific patience of someone who knows that their moment will come and is not anxious about it, because patience is not the absence of readiness, but its most complete form. She thought about Kellerman's note. You read it from the tower. That's the difference. She opened her briefing folder. She had work to do. Outside, the March light moved across the facility in the direction all light moves, without urgency, without interest in what happened beneath it, toward whatever came next. Sarah Reyes, who had spent 4 years being the only person in every room who knew the full distance between what she appeared to be and what she was, and who had crossed that distance once in a mountain valley when it was the only thing left to do, turned to the first page. She began, End Script CTA. Subscribe to Seal Legends for more stories about the people history put in the wrong category. Hit the bell. The next one is already coming. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been the most qualified person in a room and been told to wait outside?